Okay, our next group is going to be amphibians. If we look at the amphibian characteristics, they're part of kingdom Animalia, so they're animals. Phylum Chordata, so they have a backbone, and now class Amphibia, which refers to the fact that they can live both on land and in the water. If we look at more specific what characteristics amphibians have, the first is that they're going to be our first group of animals that now have legs. This is an important adaptation for living on land, as it allows for them to be more mobile on land. And most of our amphibians will have 4 legs. The only group that does not is known as the Sicilians, and that's a picture of the Sicilian in the bottom right-hand corner. Second characteristic is now they have lungs. Lungs are important for obtaining oxygen on the land, as they will not be surrounded by water and cannot do it that way. What you'll find is that most of our amphibians are going to, in the larval stage or their youth stage, will actually be in the water, and so they'll have gills in order to obtain oxygen from the water. But as they go and grow into an adult, those gills will lose they'll drop those gills, and then they'll basically develop lungs in order to live on land. Most of our adults will do this. The only exception to that is going to be salamanders, which is why if you go to the store, if you go to the zoo and you see a salamander, it usually has a mister in its cage. This also allows for better oxygen and carbon dioxide delivery and exchange to take place between the air and the bloodstream, and thus getting oxygen into the bloodstream to carry that oxygen to the muscles. Our amphibians have a double-looped circulatory system, which refers to the fact that they're actually going to have part of their blood that's going to be pumped to the lungs to become oxygenated. It will then return back to the heart as oxygenated blood, and then be pumped again throughout the rest of the body. And so if you look at the picture to the right, the pulmonary veins are going to be what return the oxygen-rich blood from the lungs to the heart, and that's going to be this loop up top. So blue blood, once again, means no oxygen, gets pumped to the lungs, becomes oxygenated. It's then going to come back to the heart into an atrium, the left atrium, enter into the ventricle, and then get pumped throughout the rest of the body, where it will then become deoxygenated and return back to the heart as deoxygenated blood. What this does is this now allows for us to have a better way of getting our blood oxygenated and then now pumping that throughout the rest of the body. What you'll see, though, is that in the ventricle, there's actually going to be a mixture of blood, of both deoxygenated blood, or blue blood, and oxygenated blood, which would be red. When we look at the heart of an amphibian, the heart is actually going to be a 3-chambered heart. So the atrium, we're going to have one on either side, the left and the right side. Oxygen-poor blood is going to actually enter into the body, or return from the body, enter into the right atrium. It will then be passed to the ventricle, and then the pulmonary vein will actually then carry the oxygen-rich blood back from the lungs and enter into the left atrium. Once again, in that ventricle, there's going to be a mixture of oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood, and the ventricle will pump the blood to the lungs and to the body tissue. So the ventricle will do both the pumping to the lungs and to the rest of the body. So you can see on either side here we have our ventricles, our atriums on either side, and then down below we'll have our ventricle with its, once again, thick-walled muscular part. If we were to do our frog dissection, you could actually see the color difference between these two different types of muscles. The atriums are usually going to be a little bit darker and more flexible. If you push on it, you could actually see them move in and out pretty easily. But then when you push on the ventricle, it's actually a thick, tough muscle. And that's for the purpose of actually pumping that blood to the rest of the body. The 5th characteristic of our amphibians is going to be cutaneous respiration, meaning that they can breathe through their skin or respire through their skin. This skin breathing allows for them to actually then get oxygen into their bloodstreams through some small blood vessels that actually are located just underneath the skin layer, which is the epidermis. What this does is it actually limits the size of the amphibians because, once again, we need a high ratio of skin surface to that body volume, and so thus reduces our size of our amphibians so they don't get too big. If you were to see a big bullfrog or something like that, that's usually out of the norm. If we were to do our frog dissection, you could actually peel back the skin and see these little tiny blood vessels that are almost attached to that skin layer, and that is once again due to their cutaneous respiration. This is also important why they have to live near a water source because when that skin dries up, those blood vessels shrink down, close up, and they can't have this type of skin breathing take place. When we talk about how amphibians reproduce, our frogs and our toads, once again, must live near a water source in order to do this. What will happen is you'll have the frogs and the toads, they will lay their eggs into the water. What you'll have is the male usually will fertilize them as the female is excreting them from her body. Males usually have little pads on their thumbs in order to push the eggs out of the female, and then he will fertilize them as that's taking place. Those eggs will then hatch into tadpoles, which do not look like a frog, but then they will actually start to grow little hind legs and then develop front legs as well. That's known as a froglet. And then they will develop into their adult phase. This is known as metamorphosis. Because the larval stage, or that tadpole, does not look like the adult, and it changes its appearance, that is what is known as metamorphosis. So similar to that of a butterfly, it will go through a metamorphic stage. Salamanders will actually lay their eggs in moist places. Fertilization usually takes place externally. The young will have gills and look like they're adults. However, they will then drop those gills later on, or some of them will drop their gills later on as adults. Remember, they breathe through their skin. They do not have lungs, and so they must stay near a water source and live there for the rest of their life. Because they do look like they're adults in the larval stage, they do not go through metamorphosis. Caecilians are going to be what you'll find. They live in the soil, and so what will happen is the male will actually deposit the sperm directly into the female. Some will give live birth, while others will lay eggs that then will develop external from the female. When we look at the order of Anura, this is going to be our order that contains both our frogs and our toads. If you don't know the difference between the two, a frog is usually going to have moist skin, smooth skin, usually have longer hind legs and front legs, which allows for it to be a better jumper. They will then lay their eggs when they reproduce. They will usually group those eggs together in clusters, while toads usually do it in a line. Toads, for instance, will have dry, bumpy skin. They usually have squattier bodies. They like to bury themselves in the sand or the soil, and that helps with that. They will have shorter legs, and then once again, their eggs will usually be laid in a straight line, attaching to the surface of a water or a water source. Habitats for both, they live pretty much all over, from the deserts to the rainforests, mountains, valleys, and ponds. They live, they're very adapted to living on land. Adult anuras are going to be carnivores, so they'll eat insects, and they do this by using their sticky tongue in order to catch those insects. And once again, their skeleton is very much modified for jumping and moving on land, and they have those muscular legs in the back in order to help with that as well. The next order is going to be Urodela. This is going to be our salamanders and our newts. Salamanders and newts will have elongated bodies. They usually have long tails and smooth, moist skin. Once again, they will lay their eggs in moist places. They have to live around those moist places in order to keep their skin from drying out. And they, once again, do not have lungs, so they breathe only through their skin. They cannot be away from water for too long or longer periods of time due to that fact, because they have to keep that skin nice and moist in order for them to continue to breathe. And then the last order is going to be apoda. Remember, our prefix a means no and pod means foot. So these are our no foot or our caecilians. They are legless and worm-like. They usually live in the tropics underneath the soil where they like to burrow and live. They then will feed on small invertebrates, similar to those that we've talked about with our annelids. And then they'll have small bony scales that are embedded into their skin that help support their body as well. Okay, so the rest of the assignment, you're going to be looking up frog structures and functions. I've listed those there for you on the assignment. Here's another copy of that as well. What I would like for you to do is find a picture of each one of these, okay, I think there's 10 of them. And what I want you to do is find a picture for the structure, but then tell me the function or what they're used for within the frog's body. Because we do not get to do our frog dissections, this is what I'm going to do for you. This assignment will count towards that. So make sure you get that turned in with the rest of your stuff, and you should be good for this week. Thank you.